Halloween 5 has the subtitle The Revenge of Michael Myers, and apparently I must have done something to really piss him off because his revenge comes in the form of boring me to tears. Okay, so that was a cruel opening line. I take no joy in tearing art down, even the stuff that I don't like. I'm not going to repeat myself, I've gave you this speech before earlier in this month multiple times now, but look, there really is not a lot for me to like with Halloween 5. As I mentioned yesterday, we're in what's known as the Thorn trilogy years of this slasher's career. 3 films back to back that introduced the positive of new lead character Jamie, a young child and Michael's nephew, who is brilliantly acted in the first 2 entries by Danielle Harris, but also doubled down a lot on the parts of the character that I enjoyed the least. A contrived and supernatural backstory that adds occult elements to an otherwise mostly grounded character. Now Halloween 4 wasn't to my taste, as I've already mentioned, but it was commendable at least in how it kept all that overcomplicated mumbo jumbo stuff completely out of the way. Series producer Mustafa Akkad wanted a back to basics slasher film, with a grounded human villain, and on that level at least, it delivered. It is bizarre then, that after the commercial success of Halloween 4, for some reason, they did a complete 180 on this simplistic approach and introduced a telepathic link between Michael and his niece, planted the seeds for a cult that revolved around the druidic symbol of Thorn, which is how the trilogy got its name, and introduced a mysterious man in black connected to all of this to set up a larger secondary villain. Why would you do this? Mustafa Akkad credited the back to basics approach of 4 as being one of the key elements to its commercial success. So, what the hell? Well, the reason this is all here is deeply unsatisfying. There's no madly misguided but well-meaning intentions at the centre of it all. There's no big series plans to come up this had to set up that just didn't pan out. There's no aggrandised auteur that insisted on the changes. It's simply because this shit was rushed. Akkad wanted a film quick, and they started principal photography on this film while the original screenplay was still going through revision cycles. The first draft sounded more interesting at least. A writer known as Shem Bitterman expanded on 4's bleak ending by having Jamie Lloyd, our young protagonist who stabbed her foster mother in that film's final twist, become full evil for this one. For whatever reason though, his idea was thrown out by Akkad in the studio. Maybe they thought that a child serial killer might be too controversial or hard to believe for a whole film, or maybe they just got cold feet on making anyone but Michael the main murderer after Halloween 3 drastically underperformed. Whatever the reason, director Othenin-Girard and Michael Jacobs were brought in to do rewrites. There's a pretty bold story of Dominique getting the gig after apparently throwing the script they gave him in the trash in front of Akkad and his team, but other than that, production was pretty standard, just, on fast forward, which meant the final screenplay was more than a little unpolished. Somewhere along the lines, there was apparently an actual effort to minimise the supernatural aspects. There was a lot more druidic cult stuff earlier in production, but that stuff got filtered out. However, because supernatural elements are still in the final production, just in a less significant role, this only served to confuse the audience further, as it just means that a lot of it goes unexplained. Especially the aforementioned mysterious man in black that appears near the end of the movie, who even the filmmakers had no idea about. Putting the guy in there and figuring they'd just work out his role in all of this in the next movie. The whole thing is just a real hack job through and through. Rushed out the door, junky in execution, and already setting up sequels with no idea what those films will even look like. I don't know if this is coming across, but needless to say, I'm not too keen on this one. I suppose we should cover what it's all about though. So the film starts in the previous film's final act. Michael is shot and falls down a mine shaft, only this time we see a bit more of what happened after. As the sheriff and lynch mob hoist dynamite down after him to finish him off, Michael is able to crawl to a nearby creek and save himself. Stumbling away from the site of his near-death experience, he comes across an elderly hermit who, I guess unfamiliar with the legacy of the man who has fallen into his lap, nurses Michael back to health after he falls into a coma. If you're thinking it's a little weird that this guy doesn't contact the hospital or anything, or that he's somehow prepared to care for a comatose patient for what ends up being a whole year despite his secluded lifestyle, that's because this is more or less a reskinned artifact of the old, more supernatural script. Originally, this guy was supposed to be a member of the cult of Thorn, who resurrected Michael for, I don't know, cult reasons. But lacking this more out there story beat, they still needed something to bring back Michael, so they kept his resurrection, if you will, but just grounded it a bit more in reality. Which is an odd choice when you consider very shortly after this, the film introduces the plot point of psychic familial links. A year later, Michael awakens and kills his unfortunate carer, and this then brings us to the Haddonfield Children's Clinic, the site where Jamie was admitted to after she stabbed her foster mom in the fourth film's closing events. Her mom survived, by the way, which was probably written in as an element to keep our innocent lead still likeable. It'd be harder to root for her after all had she actually committed murder, even if she was just a child. That said though, because this is the direction they went with and not an evil Jamie, doesn't that kind of undermine the whole shock ending of 4? Which is often the thing that fans and even critics point out to as the best element of that movie. I know they probably wanted Michael to be the main focus, but this feels really flat, doesn't it? It's toothless. There is very little consequence to Jamie's actions at the end of that last movie now. Like, they introduced that she's mute now, but that feels more to do with her general trauma surrounding Michael as opposed to being related to her attack on her foster mother. And sure, she's in a children's clinic, but like, that's it. It hasn't even really strained her relationship with her family seemingly, as her foster sister Rachel visits her in hospital regularly and has no trepidations around her whatsoever. Which I don't mind, to be fair. I actually think that's kind of sweet that her sister still just treats her like the little girl she is and doesn't feel like she has to step on eggshells around her in case of a sudden and random violent outburst. But man, if this doesn't feel like a flat and uninteresting way to write around a huge dramatic plot beat. It just feels like they were happy to have the shock ending of 4, but damn did they not want to deal with the consequences of it. It's such a shame too, as despite the issues I personally have with 4's ending that I went into in my last vid, there's no denying it's kind of a big deal and it's a huge dramatic point to kick off into potentially new and interesting stories from. Ignoring it feels so risk averse. But then they start introducing lame supernatural stuff in this one, so they couldn't have been that opposed to risk. This isn't just a me thing as well, even some of the cast were baffled by this. The fantastic Donald Pleasance, who once again returned as Dr. Loomis, found this decision totally wrong. In an interview with Fangoria, he said, "This director has a lot of imagination and is very clever, but I don't think he understands that he's making the 5th film in a series rather than his own idea of what the film should be. I haven't agreed with a lot of what he has done with the film. So we talk and come to compromises. I think they should have gone along with the fact that the little girl is now totally evil. I was disappointed that we now discover she did not kill her mother at the end of the last film." And he's totally right, isn't he? This feels like a retcon. A lot of the drama of that final scene comes from the assumption that Jamie has killed her mother and now she just hasn't? Takes a lot of the wind out of that ending sails. I get that Akkad and the studio probably wanted a lot of focus on Michael. They were real keen not to make the Halloween 3 mistake again. But like, there's a way to still give Jamie's actions consequences and have a huge Michael focus too. This didn't have to be a choose one or the other kind of deal. Actress Danielle Harris, who plays Jamie in Halloween 4 and 5, actually had what I think was an absolutely class idea. Although she's kind of went back on it now, she had said in the past that she thought as a kid that she was going to be the killer of this one, or maybe even Michael's little sidekick. And man, when I read that last part, my brain just started filling with ideas. Yeah, it's pulpy as all hell to give this iconic screen presence a little mini-me, but at this point, the series was pulpy. It was far from the critical darling the original was, and in a way that's kind of freeing. When you're not chasing critical acclaim and are more concerned with just making fun, entertaining and profitable slashers a la Friday the 13th, why not have some fun with it? Imagine for a moment a story where Michael comes back not to kill Jamie, but to take her under his wing. I fucking love the image of this tall murder man holding hands with this little clown child over a body they both just slaughtered. It's an almost Burton-esque visual, so weirdly fun and morbid. And it's such a new and interesting dynamic. How many slasher films can you think of had a murder Batman and a little Robin he was teaching the ways of the trade? It could have been a really fun story, one that made Michael's strange familial obsession a lot more interesting. Okay, fuck it. I genuinely didn't intend for this to be in this video when I started it, but I'm pitching again. This is a corny, pulpy and campy suggestion, but I kinda love it. It'll be quick this time though, I promise. Okay, so, Michael survives at the end of Halloween 4 and disappears for a bit. We'll keep that the same. Jamie is still in the children's hospital, and she's doing all the things Dr. Loomis once saw Michael do. She's just dead behind the eyes, completely transfixed on nearby walls. Nothing seems to get through to her. Loomis and the hospital staff completely write her off, with Loomis even campaigning to have her put in maximum security, much to her sister Rachel's protest, who is still protective of her sister despite Jamie having killed their mother. Basically, everyone on the planet writes this kid off apart from Rachel. And sometimes during Rachel's visits, Jamie shows a little humanity. Just tiny things, but Rachel sees them. She'll make a joke and she'll see a hint of a childish innocent smirk. She'll touch Jamie's hand and Jamie will gently grip back. And she'll tell the doctors and Loomis about this, but they'll just dismiss her. Tell her she's too attached. Tell her she's just like her uncle, that there's nothing there. Anyway, a year later when Michael heals from his wounds, keep the hermit in, I don't care, or send him to a hospital despite Loomis's protest and have him protected by the state in maximum security while he pulls himself together. Whatever happens, he resurfaces and he escapes and heads back to Haddonfield to continue what he started. He catches a news report announcing his escape, and just as he's about to leave and carry on with his latest spree, perhaps even hunt down his niece, something uncharacteristically catches his attention. They mention in the report about his niece killing her foster mother and being kept in the hospital, and he pauses. He tilts his head in that way he rarely does sometimes, that never really betrays exactly what he's thinking, and as an image of his smiling pre-murderer status niece comes up on the screen, he gently reaches out and touches the glass. His pale, emotionless mask not telling us for certain what he means with this, but the gentle touch almost suggesting a sense of kinship? Of familiarity, perhaps? Whatever's happening there, he knows his next moves and makes his way to the hospital. Jamie sits in her room, unflinching and unreactive to the terrified cries and screams outside that suggest her uncle's arrival. Michael smashes the door to her open, the Halloween theme that plays to mark his arrival, suggesting he's out for violence. She does not react to his presence, other than to look over in his direction. She is not scared. She does not attempt to flee. She just observes him. He walks, knife in hand, to the foot of her bed and pauses for a moment. The music is tense, the two observe one another, and Michael extends an open palm. Jamie considers it, her face expressionless, giving us little knowledge as to what she is thinking. And then suddenly, just as the huge crescendo in the track hits, Jamie places her hand in his, the theme continuing as the two walk hand in hand through the bodies of the staff that line the floor of the hospital. We cut to a costume store closing up for Halloween night. A member of staff sends away what he thinks is the last customer before locking up, only to hear someone in the back by the changing rooms. He shouts out that they're closing, and when he goes to investigate, he finds Jamie all alone. He asks her if she's okay, says, "Do you have any parents I could call? Is there anyone looking after you?" Yeah, there is, and it's Michael fucking Myers. He emerges from behind the changing room curtain and stabs the dude half to death, before turning to Jamie, already now in the clown costume she wore when she committed her first kill, but with the mask resting on top of her head. Michael hands her his knife. The staff member, bleeding out, crawls weakly over to the little girl, begging her, pleading her to run and get help. She simply lowers the mask and stabs him in the throat, completing her transformation into Michael's little sidekick. She hands her uncle back the knife and he picks her up and walks out the shop with her. News gets back to Rachel and Loomis of what happened at the hospital, and they react very differently. Rachel is terrified for her sister and is determined to find and save her. Loomis is more of the opinion that evil has taken an apprentice, which would definitely be the film's tagline, by the way, and there's just another thing out there that needs to be put in the ground. The two begin their search for Michael and Jamie, Rachel determined to find Jamie first before Loomis gets to her and shows the young girl no mercy. Meanwhile, Michael and Jamie continue their slaughter. And they're having a real easy time with it because guess what? It's Halloween night and they just look like a kid and her caring uncle going out trick-or-treating. We play with this dynamic a lot, having scenes like Jamie knock on the door and when the homeowner answers and talks to her like any other kid, complimenting her on her wonderful clown costume, Michael storms in the house and starts slaughtering, often with Jamie getting in on the action. As this dynamic plays out, we also notice how it changes Michael. Though his kills start off as emotionally distant as always, when one of their potential victims draws a knife in self-defense on Jamie, something fucking uncharacteristically snaps in him. He doesn't just kill this person, he destroys them, breaking their hand and then smashing them repeatedly and angrily into a nearby wall in a kill that feels far more emotive than anything he has done in his past. He even immediately checks on Jamie afterwards. Though his face obviously doesn't show it, the audience is suggested through his actions that he's grown extremely protective of his niece. As Michael and Jamie continue their slaughter, Loomis is the first to catch up with them, but as he draws his gun on Jamie, Rachel jumps in and pushes the gun into the air as he fires. Jamie, of course, doesn't react, but we linger on her, observing Rachel fighting for her. As Rachel struggles with Loomis and his gun, she screams at her little sister to flee, and Jamie actually listens to her and turns to run, but as she does so, she goes straight into Michael's legs. She looks up at him, he looks down at her, and then towards Loomis and Rachel. He walks past his niece and stabs Loomis in the back, who falls off to the side. Then he turns his attention to Rachel. He begins to strangle her. Loomis is down and fading. Rachel is losing consciousness. As she struggles to break free of Michael's grasp, she looks around for something to aid her, but there's nothing. It's all over and she knows it. With her last breath, she looks at her little sister, standing there, unassumingly with a knife in her hand, watching all of this unfold with a passive expression. And with her last breath, Rachel begs her to run, to save herself. Just as Rachel is about to fade, suddenly a knife plunges into Michael's leg. He drops Rachel and stumbles in pain. He turns to see his attacker and finds his niece's hand on the knife handle. For a moment, he does not know what to do. The confusion gives Rachel time to grab Loomis's gun and shoot Michael as many times as possible, emptying the entire clip. As he falls back and begins to bleed out, his niece walks over to him. She looks at him, dying in front of her, and his gaze meets hers. She removes her mask, symbolising her severing that connection to her uncle. Michael's hand raises up. It almost looks as if he would choke his niece for her betrayal. But as he reaches her face, his palm opens. He rests it on her cheek gently. He forgives her. She holds his hand by her face as he passes, until her sister pulls her away and holds her close. Loomis, regaining consciousness, watches this all unfold, and as he observes Rachel and Jamie, he sees the little girl he had once written off. He smiles gently. Perhaps she can be saved, after all. Okay, pitch over. Sorry, that one was kind of rushed. Point is, you can do a Jamie and Michael story without adding supernatural elements and without undermining your previous film's ending. Wow! I'm not saying that idea is crazy polished or anything. I literally came up with it as I was writing this video, so it's like a 5-minute thought. But the point is, the filmmakers didn't have to choose between the two characters, that's all. Apologies for that massive and unnecessary tangent. Let's get back to the actual movie's plot now. Jamie is at Haddonfield Hospital and is displaying signs of a telepathic link to Michael. Loomis becomes aware of this and is convinced that means Michael is alive, and gets real angry at this mute child when she won't cooperate and tell him exactly where he is. I do not like this Loomis. I find him extremely hard to root for in this one because of the way he treats Jamie. He's pretty awful. Back with Michael, we begin to follow him as he starts his next killing spree. His first stop, Jamie's foster sister Rachel. I would scream into a pillow right now, but if I do, I know that all my makeup will come off on it. Fucking hate this. I'm not going to repeat myself too much because I've already went in hard on Friday 2's treatment of First Film's final girl Alice and Nightmare 4's treatment of the Dream Warriors, but for God's sake, what is with slasher movies treating major characters like fucking expendable cannon fodder? I absolutely despise this. It's so infuriating and completely undermines that character's previous narrative victories. This sucks so much. Apparently, they originally planned to make her death way more brutal too, and have Michael stab scissors down her throat. But Rachel's actress Ellie Cornell was really disappointed to find out her character was going to be killed off in such an unceremonious manner after playing such a big part in 4, that she only agreed to do this 5th film if they gave her a pay raise and rewrote her death to be less brutal. Small silver lining, I guess, that the actress got paid a bit more to put up with this bullshit, but man is this still infuriating. I can only assume this and the lack of utilising Jamie's ending from 4 in an interesting way was just a symptom of its shitty rush production. Maybe with more time they might have done something more compelling or rewarding here, but whatever, this is what we got. God, I really just do not like this film. Anyway, Michael carries on doing Michael things and picks a new lady to stalk, namely Rachel's friend Tina. He kills Tina's boyfriend Mike and steals the mask Tina had given to him as a Halloween present, which does give us an admittedly somewhat cool sequence where Tina is picked up by a man she believes to be her boyfriend but is actually Michael in disguise, and you're spending the whole sequence waiting for either Michael to snap or her to realise who she's in the car with. Based on a warning given by Jamie though from her psychic connection to Michael, the police are able to get to her first before Michael is able to kill her, and he leaves before they can click on that he's there. While all this is going on, Jamie and her friend Billy, another kid from the clinic, are taken out for Halloween night as a special treat, and Tina, against the police who have been assigned to guard her wishes, goes with some friends to a Halloween party at a farm. While performing at a costume competition, Jamie's psychic connection to Michael warns her that Tina is in danger, and Tina and Billy go to warn her. Michael kills some of Tina's mates after they go to have sex in a barn, but Tina is able to escape as Jamie and Billy arrive on the scene. Michael begins to chase Jamie down in a car, which I guess to the movie's credit is kind of intense, what with her being a little kid and all, but he crashes into a tree, and in a genuinely pretty sweet and selfless moment, Tina, who was previously shown to care very much about Jamie, allows the kids some time to escape by sacrificing herself. Loomis arrives on the scene to find Jamie, and together they decide to stop Michael with a final plan. The two, along with Town Sheriff Mika, set up a staged scenario/trap kind of thing with the intent to draw Michael out and kill him. It's a pretty farcical setup that sees Jamie mimicking the actions of Michael's sister Judith from the first film. She sat at her mirror at the old Myers house, combing through her hair, and like, is this necessary? Who is this for, really? It kinda doesn't sit right with me as well, because this kid is 6, and she's mimicking the actions of a teenager who just had sex with her boyfriend and was partially naked during the events she's imitating. Don't get me wrong, they don't do anything dodgy with the kid here, the sexual aspect of the original scene isn't really brought up, but it still just feels a little bit off. I don't know, I just don't vibe with it. I also don't understand how this draws Michael out any more than her just, you know, being there. Surely he's coming to kill her anyway, what does this achieve? Whatever the case, Michael does eventually arrive, and Loomis uncharacteristically tries to reason with him, and I'm sorry, what the fuck? Since when has trigger-happy Loomis ever wanted to reason with this guy? This goes completely against our understanding of their dynamic. In the first film, he's depicted as seeing Michael as so inhuman, he only ever refers to him as it. And this sudden change of heart also makes his impatience with Jamie earlier in the film even less sympathetic, because now it wasn't the desperate pleas of a man who wanted nothing more than to see this monster dead and buried, but the actions of a man who still saw Michael as a human patient. I don't buy it. And apparently, neither does Michael, who chucks Loomis over the stair banister. There's a bit of a pursuit of Jamie as the film draws to its final act. Dead dog warning at this point, by the way, just in case you're thinking of watching and this is a big no-no for you, as I know it is for a lot of people. And then we get an almost compelling, if not completely unearned moment, where the film attempts to somewhat humanise Michael for a second. As he corners Jamie for the final kill, she calls him uncle, and this gives him pause. And he even removes his mask. As she touches his face though, this sends him into a manic fury and he continues the chase. There's something there that's interesting, I'm sure, and it was the director's intention to humanise Michael in some way, hence Loomis uncharacteristically reasoning with him as well, but it just doesn't feel earned. There simply isn't enough in the film prior to give us this moment, so it doesn't work. And because it doesn't work, it only serves to undermine Michael's already dwindling threat levels that were first harmed by the familial and occult revelations of 2 even further. Either make him be a can't be reasoned with monster, or set up to humanise him. Don't do both, because then his uninterrupted monstrosity undermines our belief in his humanity, and his sudden humanity undermines his status as a monster to be feared. It's just all not very good. Whatever though. To close out, Loomis goes mad and uses Jamie as bait, again wildly clashing in tone with the guy we just saw reason with Michael Pryor. This film just does not know what to do with him. Is this man desperate or understanding? Pick a damn lane, movie. Anyway, he gets Michael with a tranquilizer gun. I honestly can't remember if the reason he's using a tranq and not a normal gun is explained, or whether this is another example of the movie's wild inconsistency with its approach to Loomis, but call me unprofessional, I genuinely cannot bring myself to care enough to check. He then beats Michael unconscious with a plank of wood before collapsing on him himself, and Michael is taken into custody. And then we get a total ass pull of an ending where a mysterious man in black breaks Michael out of prison, and we end on the image of Jamie weeping, knowing he's still out there. What a crock of bollocks. I know I don't like to rag on films, but this is just bad. Not even bad in an interesting way like Jason Goes to Hell or Freddy's Dead. Just bad. Its one redeeming quality, Danielle Harris's fantastic acting, is even hampered by the decision to make her mute for half the movie and give her such terrible material to work with. Credit to the kid, she still manages to convey a lot of emotion without dialogue, which is demanding even for an adult, never mind a child, but it's a small saving grace in what is an otherwise irredeemable dull slog. I genuinely like this less than both Jason Goes to Hell and Freddy's Dead. I know it probably doesn't seem like it because I haven't went as insane covering this as I did those other two, but that's honestly because I find it extremely hard to care about this one. I nothing this film, and that's honestly worse than hating it. It is dire in its dullness, its only interesting point of discussion being in its wasted potential. Though it introduces several bad elements, the never before established or hinted at telepathic link, Loomis's awful and inconsistent characterization, a humanized but also not at all humanized Michael, it never does anything truly awful enough to be interesting. It is as risk averse as can be. Even in introducing its ill-advised more supernatural elements, it is never brave enough or experimental enough to commit to examining and expanding upon those ideas. It revolutionizes itself in only the most dull and predictable way, with a higher body count and more gore. It is the filmic equivalent of an exasperated and bored sigh. If you like this movie, and I know there are some out there that do, more power to you, but I cannot say I personally recommend it. And you know the worst part? It is not my least favourite film in the Thorn trilogy. That comes tomorrow with Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. And oh boy, that one makes this film look excellent by comparison. So if you don't want to miss when I dive into my personal lowest point in the franchise, then remember to subscribe to my OnlyDans at the red button below, and please do like if you enjoyed the video and comment with your thoughts. I would genuinely love to know what you guys thought of this one if you've seen it. Also, if you're really enjoying this show and would like to help support the channel, you can do so by becoming a patron at the Patreon link in the description and get access to some cool exclusives for your troubles. More info at that link below. Anyway, that's all from me today. So as always, I've been Dan Drambles, you're watching Wholesome Halloween 2 Slasher Season, and I will see you again tomorrow.